Hello, the world of Athletics Weekly. My name is Paul Hobrough. I'm the resident physiotherapist. As you can see from some of my wall art, I've treated some of the best running athletes in the world, and I've had a lovely career working predominantly with runners. And that's one of the reasons why we have this nice link with Athletics Weekly, where we get to answer your questions. You may have read my column in Athletics Weekly over the last couple of years, where I've written down my sort of thoughts on a particular topic or injury. Now what we're doing is we're actually getting your questions, and I'm going to answer them live, and then it'll be sort of put into the magazine in a different format. So thank you very much for coming along and listening to this. My company is Hobrough Healthcare, my surname, Hobrough Healthcare. So you can find us on hobroughhealthcare.com if you want to ask any questions, or you just go straight through Athletics Weekly and ask them. And we'll keep doing this as long as you're asking questions. So my first question is this. Legend has it that athletes/runners make notoriously bad patients. It's making me chuckle already. Is this true? And if so, how do you personally deal with those who struggle to entertain the idea of rest when it's needed to recover from an injury? So kind of two-part question there. First of all, the legend can be true. Athletes can be fairly difficult people to treat, but they are my favorite type of patient because they're working at a very, very high level. If you were to put this into, let's say a car mechanic terms, we really are dealing with the top F1, Ferrari, Red Bull or McLaren car, rather than perhaps dealing with the odd Morris Minor that would travel through the garage. So they are in one way more difficult. Some athletes can be, have their neediness dial sort of turned up, and if you're not that person, you recognize one of your friends that is. But for me, it's all about education. I think that if you help the person to understand why, then they will comply. And this is a key part of the way in which I treat people, is I work very, very hard to make sure they understand, what the injury is. We can't always decipher why it happened or when it happened unless it's an acute injury. So an acute injury is where you know the time, date, place where it happened. It's that sudden rugby tackle, ow, roll of the ankle. The slightly more chronic injury is one that builds up slowly over time, and many, many, many more runners that come to see me have this chronic type injury. So understanding why or how it came about is sometimes less important than understanding what it is and what our route through to treating that is going to be. So a patient will always be a difficult patient if they feel like they're not listened to, if they don't understand, if at any point they're made to feel like they're a bit silly or a bit inferior in the process. So my modus operandi has always been to use simple language, to break it down, to make sure that there is full understanding gained and what we call concordance in terms of the way forward. So if I say this is the best treatment for you and you just agree because you just come alongside and you're going to agree with everything that I say, then we haven't reached concordance. Concordance is where you understand what's wrong, you understand the different opportunities or different treatment modalities that we've got, and there are lots in this room behind me, and then together we make the decision based upon me educating you. And I think that then means that the individual relaxes, they feel in safe hands, and you tend to turn what might be a difficult patient into an easier patient. But the second part of that is, how do I deal with those that struggle to entertain the idea of rest? Well, I'm not a big fan of rest either. In fact, I regularly choose to find a way to keep the person active and tend to only employ rest if it's absolutely needed. Therefore, I hope my reputation is one that is, he's only going to tell you to rest if you absolutely need to. And I can back that up by saying exactly what will happen, or what I believe will happen, if you don't take the appropriate rest. But I very much work as a physio. Some of you might remember the images that the army put out where there's someone doing chin-ups on a bar, and as it pans down, you realize their legs in plaster, and they say injury is not a reason not to train. Well, there's always something that you can do. And a lot of runners will historically, I think we're getting better now with the younger athletes coming through, not have paid enough attention to the general strength conditioning. They won't be doing the right types of core exercise. Everyone loves to do a plank, even though their deep core maybe isn't capable of doing that. And so it's an ability when you're injured to actually strip back some of the things that are missing and use that as an opportunity to get back some of those missing strength components. And that's why the assessment is so vital, and doing, you know, a full sort of like pan back look at the athlete. So when someone is in front of you and they are struggling with a knee problem, for example, it's really important that you're looking at what the mobility of the foot and ankle is like, what's their hip movement like, what's their core strength like, what do they look like when they're running, how does this transpose into things like single leg hops and single leg squats, because all that information will start to tell me, as I'm watching lots and lots of different tests, to kind of funnel in on where the work needs to be done. It can be difficult for someone to comprehend that their left Achilles problem is actually as a relation to an underactive right glute, for example. So I'm always keen to try and take the person on that journey with me, prove it through testing, and then get them to a point where they fully understand the role that I'm going to play, and the role that, and more importantly, the role they're going to play. Typically, I've got 30 minutes in your life in a week. So that's 7 days of 7 times 24 hours. And I've only got 30 minutes. So the work that you as the athlete puts in is way more important. And it's just about me giving you the drop of oil in the right place to make the best decisions and to do the best exercises in the best way. And my actual treatment phase, whilst I still think is very, very important, it becomes a small cog in that wheel. When someone genuinely needs to rest, then I think that it's relatively easy to help to understand. What I dislike immensely is the standard response that some healthcare practitioners will do, which is, well, rest for 6 weeks. It does nothing. Let's just think about muscle tissue just for a second. What happens when you rest a muscle? Does it get bigger and stronger, or does it get smaller and weaker? Well, I think everyone knows the answer. You rest it, it gets smaller and weaker. You just have to look at a limb that is immobilized in plaster and how quickly that returns to almost bone and skin within the space of just a week or two. So keeping the person active in the right way is vitally important. And oftentimes it's about strengthening something that's weak in the right way is going to be the thing that brings the person out of there. So are we talking about resting from running, or are we talking about resting from training? Then there's the example of, well, what actually is training for? So we can go for a run. If I do the exact same run every day for 8 weeks, the likelihood is I got a lot more from the run I did at the beginning of week 1 than I did from the run I did at the end of week 8, because the body naturally gets used to it. So the benefit of you going for that run is actually significantly less once you're used to it. You've got to overload the system. You've got to improve what you're doing, and training programs should constantly be evolving. It's exactly the same with strength training. Someone says, well, I do loads and loads of squats or single leg squats. Well, are you building up the amount of weight you're using? Are you challenging the body in a certain way? And rehab is no different, which is why being set rehab exercises and needing to come back periodically to see your physios to make sure that you're doing those in the correct way and you're overloading. And all of that comes together to get the best outcome. So when I say rest, I mean rest, but I very, very, very rarely would say to someone, you need to rest. I might just change the method in which they run. So I hope that what comes across from that question is that it's about education, it's about understanding, and it's about putting the responsibility back onto the athlete to meet their goals, which is, if I do my job correctly, when you're injured, I will find things that were wrong anyway, build those back, and at the end of a period of being injured, I would hope you'd come out and be able to run faster, because we'd fix some of the other things that perhaps weren't working as well. Maybe they led to injury, maybe they didn't, but by zooming out on your patient and getting a good understanding of where their weaknesses lie, you will almost certainly send them back as a slightly faster runner than whence they came in. Injury is an opportunity. Think of it like that. Okay, so my next question, overdoing it in the Nike Vaporfly, and I've landed with posterior tibial tendon problems that are just not shifting 10 weeks on. Running hurts, cycling out of the saddle hurts. Any help, please? Okay, first of all, do we need to blame the Nike Vaporfly? Am I crazy enough to do that? Where lots of people will be listening. Not everybody that would wear a particular type of shoe will get the same injury. So therefore, how can we extrapolate that that's what? It could be an unhappy accident. It could be where you're at with that. I'm not going to get into the shoe discussion, but feel free for someone to ask me that for the next episode, because I do have very strong views on who should be using these and when and where it makes the biggest benefit. But I think what I'm going to zoom in here is on the posterior tibial tendon problem. Now, for those of you that perhaps don't know where the tibialis posterior is, I'll have to show you my own foot. So here we are, and we've got a tendon that runs down the inside, just comes underneath that knobbly bit on your ankle, and then goes under your foot and attaches on the underside of your foot. And tibialis posterior, with a muscle tendon down the other side, peroneus longus, work a bit like stirrups on your foot. So as your foot plants, on the inside, we've got tib posts that will help to keep the foot in the right position. And on the outside, we've got peroneus longus. And together, they'll help to work in these sort of actions with the foot. So if someone has shin splints, then tibialis posterior will be almost certainly the main culprit in there, because it runs down the inside of that shin. So when you've got a posterior tibial tendon problem, or I like to say tibialis posterior issue, and he's had it for 10 weeks, so we're almost at 3 months, which means it's becoming a chronic problem. Hurts when he goes running. So typical runner, I haven't run for a couple of days, I'll go out and try again, and guess what, it still hurts because it hurt last time you went running. And what are you doing to try and develop that? Why does cycling out the saddle hurt? That's a slightly trickier one, but I would suggest that there's some movement in that foot when you're cycling. So I don't know whether you're clipped in or not, but certainly I don't know how much that really adds to it. If you've got a diagnosis of tibialis posterior tendon problems, presumably the question you want to answer is, how do I get out of this? I'm a huge advocate of shockwave therapy when you've got chronic tendinopathy. This will help stimulate on a cellular level what's going on in the tendon, and where your body's, if you like, healing processes aren't overcoming the injury. This can really help to springboard that tendon forwards. But ultimately, we've had a weakness that has led to the fact that your tib post has not performed well. Maybe it's the shoes you're wearing. It didn't happen on both feet, so maybe just on this one side there was an issue. So in order to restore a tendon outside of my love of shockwave, I would recommend that what you did is 2 weeks of isometric loading. Now, isometric loading is no joint movement, but a high level of muscle contraction. So in this case, you'd stand on your tiptoes, but then you wouldn't move for 45 seconds. And once you're stood on your tiptoes, the way to get your tibialis posterior to work a little bit more is just to turn your heel in slightly. I'm just going to take my shoe off so you can get an understanding of that. So we're on our tiptoes, okay, and we will just turn our foot in ever so slightly to load that tibialis posterior. So you come up on your tiptoes and you just rotate in slightly that way to make sure you're contracting that muscle up the inside. And then you'd hold it for 45 seconds. If that was easy, you'd put a rucksack on and put some tins and stuff in the rucksack to make it heavier. You'd have a 2-minute rest, and you'd repeat that somewhere between 3 and 5 times, depending upon your level. But it's a completely static hold. There's no movement. There's no pumping of the heel, there's no calf raise. And you must only do that every other day. And you do that for 2 weeks. So in total, you're probably going to do that 7 times. At the end of those 2 weeks, science tells us that the pain will be a lot more under control. Then what we do is we go into what we call heavy slow resistance, which, if you imagine this is my foot, we're going to go up slowly and we're going to go down slowly, doing calf raises through the range of movement, taking about 4 seconds to go down or longer and about 4 seconds to come up. So that calf raise, that muscle is constantly under contraction. Now, you will be contracting your tibialis posterior muscle at the same time, but if at the top of your calf raise, you just turn your heel in slightly, you will make sure that you load that tib post as well. Again, heavy. You do 15 repetitions, 2 minutes rest, and you do that 4 or even 5 times. So we've got 2 weeks of isometrics, then we're going to do 6 weeks of heavy slow resistance, slow metronomic up and down, 15 reps times 4 every other day with 2-minute breaks. And if at the end of that sort of 8 weeks, your tendon isn't feeling significantly better, then definitely search out somewhere where you can maybe get some Shockwave, because I think that will really help. But that would be what I would do in this first instance. Now, this links quite nicely to the first question, doesn't it? Because we're talking about rest. And I just said, well, typical runner going out and trying to run to see if anything's changed. Definition of madness is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Now we've got a nice program of tendon repair in with our strength conditioning program. And if you're going to do some Shockwave, then you're doing something positive. And it is just possible that you could try going out and see what happens. And I have a very specific way of people doing their rehab runs. So if it hurts to run, which is what I've been told here, go out for a 3-minute run. It's not a slow jog and you're not at a fast pace. I say to people, imagine you're going to run a half marathon or something like that, and just stay at that same pace for 3 minutes. If your pain is at a 4 out of 10 or lower, then keep going. If your pain is over a 4 out of 10, stop, go home, rest a whole other day, and then because you're doing these exercises, you're doing something positive towards it, you could go and try again. The worst you're going to do is 2 or 3 minutes, okay? But because we've got a good program in place to start restoring this tendon, we're going to keep trying it in a very, very structured way. Next thing to say is tendons are like your most boring friend. And if you don't have a most boring friend, I'm afraid to say it's you, because every group has one, right? But they don't like change. Tendons don't like change. So they don't like you not running, and they don't like you running too much. So we want to try and keep all that other strength conditioning stuff going, providing nothing else is wrong. And by doing or attempting a 3-minute run, and your pain isn't over 4 out of 10, you would then rest for 2 minutes, do a gentle stretch, and then you do it again to a maximum of 5 times. You come home, you rest all the next day, which is a day that I suggest you do your strength conditioning program we've just spoken about. And then on the following day, at least 36 hours later, so 48 hours later, you would go and try and do your 3-minute runs again. And if you can do 5 lots of 3 minutes with 2 minutes little stretch stops every other day, without the pain going over 4 out of 10, then the following week, I'd suggest you go up to 4-minute runs. And the following week, you go up to 5-minute runs. And gradually you start taking down the number of rest stops and increasing the amount that you're running. This is a nice gradual way to rehab. There's one caveat to this. If you go out for a run and your pain at the start of the run is a 1 out of 10 and everything seems fine, but over the course of your 3-minute runs, your pain goes up to 2 or 3, your pain is increasing, so stop and go home. So it's a maximum of 4, but you don't want the pain to be increasing whilst you're running. So I hope that makes sense. So in short, 2 weeks isometrics, 6 weeks heavy slow resistance. If you get through that 8 weeks, you can go on to eccentric loading, which is sort of the high-end level stuff. So hopefully that answers your question, gives you a good rehab plan. My third question here, which is I constantly get a tight TFL, which stands for tensor fascia London, not transport for tensor fascia latte, not transport for London, / IT band. Any tips? So for those of you who don't know, the TFL sits here. I don't know black trousers, but pockets here, and on a trendy set of jeans, you'd have a little coin pocket just here, and that tends to be where TFL sits, and it's a muscle that ties into your IT band that goes all the way down the outside of your leg. Glute maximus also ties in, so they come in, tie in, create your IT band, and your IT band drops in and attaches in a snake tongue-like attachment just below the knee there. So when people have IT bands, well, everyone has IT bands. When people have IT band problems, they think, oh, I'm going to foam roll my IT band. So an IT band is no more like to lengthen than this pen if I attacked it with a foam roller, or this desk that I'm sitting at, or the metal legs on this chair, or this machine. It has a tensile strength of steel. It isn't going to elongate based upon you rubbing it hard with a foam roller. The thing about an IT band is it has literally millions of pain sensors, but not one stretch receptor. However, the TFL, the tensor fascia lata, or transport for London, as even I got confused on before, has a contractile component. That is muscle tissue. And so you can work on there, and you could get your foam roller or massage ball in there by lying on your front, rolling slightly to the side where the pain is, sticking the ball in on the TFL in the coin pocket where I've just showed you, getting to the point where you feel quite uncomfortable, load it by putting more of your body weight on there, hold there for 10 seconds while you starve the muscle of regular blood flow, and then stand up and stretch that muscle. So, way to stretch the muscle, don't know how well we're going to do here, but you would take one foot around the back of the other foot. So if this is the side that I want to stretch, then I take my foot around the back, so my little toes are touching, and this is the side I want to stretch. So my hip goes that way, and I lean this way. And that will put a nice little stretch just inside that coin pocket. And if I hold that 45, 60 seconds long, I can feel happy that I've just used a massage ball in there. So I starved it of its oxygen. I've stopped it from over-contracting and being in that state of being over-contracted. And then I've stretched it, which allows me to pull those muscle fiber crosslinks just slightly apart. And if I repeat that 2 or 3 times, I've got a decent chance of just elongating that muscle, taking the pressure off the IT band. Now, that is, you know, like pouring a bucket of water on a raging fire. It will help for a short period of time, but it hasn't solved the reason why your IT band is a problem. Your IT band, one of its primary roles is to keep the knee in plumb alignment when we're walking and running. So if its job becomes too difficult, it tightens up, and the theory is that it starts to get so tight that it creates friction on the outside of the knee, and that's where you get the pain. There's all sorts of other theories coming up that it's actually slightly integral with the tissues on the inside, and there's a lot of nerve ending that are being pulled around. But let's just go with the friction idea. So by loosening it off, we reduce the friction, but we're loosening off the muscle tissue, not the band itself, tensile strength of steel. Yeah. So how do we then reduce down the fact the IT band is having to overwork? Well, we've got to think about the mechanics. So standing up, get yourself into a position where you do a single leg squat. And a single leg squat where your knee is still over your middle toe, we're not wobbling around too much with the knee jumping all over the place, and our hips are nice and level. Now, for a lot of people, assume a single leg squat is going as deep as they can. I only want you to go to the depth where your knee can stay over your middle toe, we're not wobbling too much, and then come back up again. And we just concentrate on doing the single leg squat. What that's doing is it's causing me to strengthen up glute, our TFL muscle, our quads, hamstrings, our foot position, and we strengthen up the whole module. And As we get stronger and we can start to go lower into a single leg squat, holding all of those things the same, then we're onto a really good, what I said before, which is generating a harder work level for those tissues. So we start to develop through a greater range of movement. Instead of going straight for a deep single leg squat, which you can't control, which then overburdens the IT band. So if I do something as simple as gradually over the weeks, get deeper and deeper into a single leg squat on that side, and indeed the other, if you want to keep that leg up with your now better leg, what we're doing is we're teaching good mechanics through the leg. We're strengthening up all the muscles that are going to support the knee, including the foot and ankle balance and proprioception. We're developing good strength, and we're teaching the leg to be knee over middle toe rather than drifting across to over the big toe, causing the IT band lots of work. In the same breath, we want to get our glutes working hard, and we want to get our abductors, which are still our smaller glutes, working hard. And what we do that is the classic clam, hip abduction to the side, and also working the glute if we're lying face down, leg bent to 90 degrees, and we're doing that sort of glute activation. One of the things I didn't tell you in my intro, so I've written 2 books, Running Free of Injuries and The Runner's Expert Guide to Stretching. All these exercises are in there. Go to Amazon, get them if this isn't working for you, and you can look up all of those, or even prior columns in Athletics Weekly. I describe most of these exercises. So this is my route out of a sort of chronic IT band problem, and I'm sure that many of you get that. So my last question, I have a sore shoulder when running, and I think it may be to do with sitting in front of a laptop for too long. What's the best way to combat or alleviate it? Okay, so it's funny, isn't it? When we're dealing with running injuries, we tend to be kind of waist down, belly button down. But of course, people do still get shoulder problems. Now, again, I don't necessarily want to attribute this directly to sitting in front of a laptop too long. That's what you think has happened. But what happens when we sit in front of a laptop for too long is our shoulders come forwards. The coronavirus has meant that lots of us are working on our knees in comfy seats in the house, so we haven't got a nice desk set up. So we end up in this position. What that does is it elongates everything across the back and tightens everything across the chest. So we end up being round shouldered, whereas where we really want to be is shoulders back like this and a nice head position. So if we are in this position and we go for a run, we're really potentially reducing down our lung function. So our posture when we're running can overload our calf muscles, lower back. It can end up with tight hip flex and all the rest of it. So a good thing to do is to get up and get your shoulder blades back. Now, I think if you can rotate up to the sun like this and really push this part of your chest up so that it's looking at the sun, your shoulders naturally go back and your chin just tucks in slightly and you get yourself back. However, one of the best exercises to get you in a better position is something called the IJW. And I'd like to take you through the IJW. I'm not saying that this is necessarily going to be the thing that resolves your shoulder. You're the person that's talked about laptop. The shoulder assessment will be much more in detail of this. But if I just very quickly move some equipment around, I'm going to show you the IJW because it is literally my most favorite exercise in the whole world when people have got upper body issues or shoulder issues. So just give me 1 second to do that. In order to do it, I'm going to bring my treatment couch into view. Just put some brakes on there, otherwise I'll go flying. So the IJW is based around getting our head in the right position, strengthening up our upper back, and helping us be in a nice posture position. So we start off with our arms by our side and our head with our nose touching the floor. And what we do is we lift our shoulders up, so we're squeezing our shoulder blades together, and we lift our head up, but with our eye line going straight down to the floor. And then with our arms, we're going to make the letter I, which is like a straight arm bar like this. So you can imagine you're looking down from above, it looks like the letter I. And we're going to hold that with our shoulder blades squeezed up, our chin tucked in, looking down at the floor. I'm exercising my lower back. I'm exercising the muscles in between my shoulder blades. I'm exercising my deep neck flexors. I'm exercising around the back here, which is going to help me to hold everything in the right position. For 5 seconds, I'm going to hold the letter I with my arms. And I'm going to rotate my arms out to make like a letter J. So that's kind of the position my arm is in, out here. Again, squeezing my shoulder blades together, chin tucked in, looking down, making sure that my knuckles and elbows are high. And then I'm going to come up to the letter W. So my arm is now, both my arms like the letter W. Again, squeeze my shoulder blades together, looking down, hold for another 5 seconds. So that's where the IJW comes from. Now, let's turn this into a TYH, IJW, TYH. So we're going to go letter I, 5 seconds, letter J, 5 seconds, letter W, 5 seconds. Now we go letter T, letter Y, and letter H, all in the position of holding my shoulder blades high. So the consequence of what I've just done there, I've worked my lower back, I've been working my core, I've been stretching out my chest, I've been strengthening across the back of my shoulders, I've been putting my shoulders, my head, my chin, and my deep neck flexors all in the perfect position to enable me to stand up tall, turn everything up to the sun, shoulders back like they did in the army, and be in a really good, open-chested, high lung volume postural position, which I will then translate into my running. I can't say that this is necessarily going to be the thing that's going to get rid of a shoulder injury, because it's a very complex joint, could be a lot of things. But if you were to add in with a band doing external and internal rotation, that's a really good catch-all for a lot of shoulder problems. And if you combine those two things, I think you'd be in really great shape. So I think we've done enough questions today, and I've run over time a little bit. I really hope you found this useful, and I really hope that the Ask the Physio segment is going to start to develop with new questions that come from you to ask me. And each month I'm going to do another thing like this. Here we are, you know, Christmas just around the corner, and lots of festivities to be had. Who knows what's going to happen with the coronavirus? But as we get round into January, a new year, 2022, people are thinking about their racing, people are thinking about the year ahead, and when people start stepping up and going onto the track and start getting into race mode, injuries become more of a problem, and this sort of stuff is going to become vital information. So ask questions along the way, preempt questions. If you've got a marathon coming up, why do so many people get injured when they start running 16 miles in their long run? This sort of thing. Hit me up with the questions. Make sure that we're keeping up with the tempo that you need and you want. And between myself, Paul Hobrough, and Athletics Weekly, we'll aim to keep you injury-free for the whole season as best we can. Thanks so much for listening, and hope you all keep well and healthy.